Welcome back, everyone. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, ITC Midwest, our track sponsors, community and supporting sponsors, and keynote sponsor, UFG Insurance. Their continued support of the conference in a virtual setting gave us opportunities for the 2020 event that might not have happened had we gathered in person. Our midday keynote is an example of one of those silver linings to going virtual. Access to inspiring national perspectives on an important topic for Iowa. Dr. Ron Ferguson is an MIT-trained economist whose teaching research in social entrepreneurship at Harvard Kennedy School has covered state and local economic development, school reform, early childhood parenting, among other topics. His highest current priority is mobilizing communities for infant and toddler brain development through an initiative named The Basics. His most recent book, co-authored with Tatsha Robertso, is The Formula, Unlocking the Secrets to Raising Highly Successful Children. Please help me in welcoming Ron Ferguson.
Hello, everybody. Great to be with you this afternoon for half an hour or so. For those of you who don't mind turning your cameras on, I always like to be able to see who I'm talking to if I can. So it makes it seem like I'm not just talking to a blank screen. So if you don't want to turn it on, that's fine. But if you're willing to, that'd be great so we can see each other. I'm going to share my screen now to get started here. Okay, give me a second. How's it gonna? No. I assume you can see my screen, right? Okay, great. And now I'm just, I have two screens up, so now I'm spreading out your faces across the other screen so I can see who I'm talking to. Great. And thank those of you who've turned your cameras on. Okay, so you'll see the title here on the screen is How Are Achievement Gaps Related to Equity, Excellence, and Human Flourishing? And what I'm going to talk about for the next 20 minutes and then maybe open it up some are some ideas that I found useful as I try to put all these issues into perspective and to think about the trade-offs and to think about why are we really interested in this. We think, oh, what's our big why? When I think about the big why, it's partly the responsibility that we have to past, current, and future generations to carry on the evolution, the development, the flourishing of our own society. For me, that sort of takes the persona of my grandmother. This is an image, a picture of my grandmother on her 100th birthday. She was a master teacher. She taught special education classes. When I was in elementary school, we would take a day off each school year to go and watch her special education class put on a puppet show for the rest of the elementary school. They would build their own stage out of cardboard boxes. They'd make their puppets out of socks. They'd write their story and they'd put on this show for the rest of the year. And well, for that day in the year. And at her 90th birthday party, there were high school principals coming back who had been in her special education class as children. And she always used to have this phrase. She used to say, you want to be somebody, and she put the emphasis on the be. And so she's deceased now, but I think of her work living on through me. All of you have people who were important in your own formation and whose mission you may be carrying on. So past, current, future obligations to society, to our own families. This little poem here, my flesh is weak, my soul is tired, I pass the torch to you. Inside this flame live many dreams. Now you must see them through. And that kind of a sentiment is why a lot of us are here today. And we're here to talk about harvesting latent, unharvested potential. Every one of us, every child has potential that will be more likely to be realized if we effectively cultivate that potential. There's a child here in your caring who may someday cure all cancer, but you've got to lay the groundwork so that it can come to pass. She's a child who hasn't blossomed, so you cannot see her brilliance. But as sure as there's sunlight, she's here, now, in your class. I can't tell you what her name is, nor her height, nor weight, nor color, only that she is potentially a history-making lass. So I'm going to talk about some issues related to that. So I'm going to start, as you know, I'm an economist by training, so I use a lot of graphs and that kind of stuff and rely on data and facts. So we want to think about a graph where we've got on the horizontal axis academic skill and knowledge. And we've got for each group there's sort of a bell-shaped curve that represents their current, you might say, pattern of skill and knowledge. And let's say that this is the distribution for the lower achieving group in a school system. The distribution for the higher achieving group might look at that like the greenish line, so that the achievement gap at any point in time is the difference between the averages of those groups. So it would be that difference between A and B. You can measure along the horizontal axis or up here, but how far those peaks are apart from one another. The differences between individuals, I might point out, goes all the way from C to D. So the variation between individuals is much larger than the variation between groups. And we do need to kind of keep in mind sometimes we talk about achievement gaps between groups. They're members of high achieving groups that perform much lower than the typical member of the low achieving group. They're members of the low achieving group that perform much higher than the typical member of the high achieving group. So we've got these distributions. And closing the achievement gap can be thought of as moving the distribution of the lower achieving group up to where the distribution of the higher achieving group is. Now, on this diagram here, you don't need to read all the words here because I'm going to explain what they are, and I'm going to go kind of fast. So as you said before, the orange line is the lower achieving group, the greenish line is the higher achieving group. And let's assume now we're talking about a school district for the orange and the green, but the red line is the state level distribution, so across all of Iowa as opposed to in a particular distribution for the higher, as opposed to in a particular community, for the higher achieving group. Okay, so the red line is a state level distribution for the higher achieving group. The green line is the district level, the local distribution for the higher achieving group. And the orange line is the local distribution for the lower achieving group. Okay, everybody with me? I saw Danielle shaking her head, so I see Mark. So some of you, thank you for giving me some feedback. So everybody's with me so far. So now, imagine we could move the orange line to get to here. If we can move the orange line to get to there, we've basically closed the achievement gap, because now we have all three distributions pretty much overlapping. Now imagine that the green line then moves out to there. If our goal was to close the achievement gap in the district, and we were started here, we went from there to there, but now we're out there. How should we feel about that? Okay, we closed the achievement gap, and all of a sudden the high achievement group in our district started to do better. Is that a bad thing? The problem is when we talk about achievement gaps from the perspective of individual school districts or classrooms, and we're trying to close the gap within just one community, we're setting groups up to compete with each other. We're setting us up so that if one segment of the community, their kids start to accelerate and do even better, that's a negative if the goal is to close the gap within the district. I'm suggesting that we should be training children to compete with the world, not just with their classmates. And so the relevant benchmark for closing achievement gaps should be the state level distribution and not the local distribution. Okay, if you can move from this picture here to this picture here, and that orange line here is even a little ahead of the red line, as far as I'm concerned, you've closed the racial achievement gap. If you get fortunate enough for your white kids in your school district to move out to all the way out there, everybody should be cheering for them. That should be a great thing from everybody's perspective. We should want every segment of our community to do as well as they possibly can. Now, this is political, I know, but shifting from the local comparisons to statewide comparison can loosen up the local politics of addressing achievement gaps. I know of cases where superintendents have been fired, have lost their jobs for becoming too excited about closing local achievement gaps. Because the higher achieving white parents mobilize and change out the membership on the school board. They'll re-elect a new slate of people to the school board if they become too fearful that resources are being diverted only to help those kids, and our kids aren't doing as well. Okay, and so we need to be able to convince parents we're doing a super job for every segment of our community, and we've got these external benchmarks that we're using. If we can get our average students of color to mirror the performance of white kids in the statewide, then we've closed the achievement gap. For all practical purposes, it's a bigger universe we're competing with. So that's the first idea that I want to communicate. Now, the second question is that good enough? I would argue too that the closing the achievement gap should not be the only goal. We should also value excellence. And so what we really want to do is get everybody up to that purple curve. We want the distributions for both groups to overlap that purple curve. And what's true about the purple curve, it's at a high achievement level, and it's narrower, which means there's less variation between individual kids also. Remember before in the first slide, I pointed to you that C way at the bottom of the slide. It talked about how the gap between individual, where was it? We go from C all the way up to D. You got huge variation between individual children. We want to pull kids from all backgrounds up to an overall general high level of achievement. So I talk about excellence with equity, or you can call it equity with excellence, but it's both. It's excellence and equity that you're looking for. But even here, we're only emphasizing academic skill and knowledge on this axis. Is that all we care about? Well, actually, before I take the next step, I'll just point out here, these are national data. The top line are white 9-year-olds, then the gray and the orange line are Black and Latino 9-year-olds. This is from the early 1970s till about 2012, which is when they stopped collecting these data. But the thing to point out is that all three groups made progress. And by 2012, both Black and Latino 9-year-olds were ahead of where white 9-year-olds were in the early 70s. Okay, so one thing, these patterns, the achievement levels are not written in stone. And what happened over this period is the gap narrowed. So we had improvement for all of our groups at the same time that you had gap narrowing, which is essentially what this is, moving the orange line and the green line to become the purple line. If we took these two lines and we projected them out into the future, because the bottom two are a little bit steeper than the top one, at some point they would meet up out there. And you'd have both excellence and equity or more equality in performance levels. And that's the kind of progress that we want to cultivate. We want to give people a mental image of what are we trying to do. We're trying to help children from every background to become their best selves, to achieve at their highest potential. Now, we also want more than academic knowledge and skill. I have a book we put out about a year ago that I'll say a little bit more about in a minute. It's called The Formula: Unlocking the Secrets to Raising Highly Successful Children. And in that, the formula is actually 8 roles that highly effective parents play, but there's also a little equation that we use. Smarts plus purpose plus agency equals a fully realized human being. When we only focus on test scores, we're focusing a lot on smarts, or things that we equate with smarts. But effective, fully realized human beings also have a sense of purpose. Their life is about something. There's things that they're trying to accomplish. And they also have a sense of agency, which is the get up and go, the gumption, the tendency to take initiative to actually get those things done. So the question is, how do we, as education professionals, as parents, as other caring adults, cultivate not only smarts, but also purpose and agency? So it broadens out the mission. It's no longer just about looking at test scores and closing achievement gaps, even though we still do care about test scores, because we know the skills that test scores measure matter. Employers pay for those skills. But also employers pay for somebody who's got a sense of purpose, a propensity to take initiative, who's about achieving things in the world. So agency, just as another definition, the inclination to take purposeful action, the habit of taking initiative. It's the opposite of a sense of helplessness. Requires nurturing the whole child, social, emotional, and academic competencies, providing belonging, influence skills, and a sense of security. So all those things that we can't totally unbundle in this short conversation. So, and purpose is personal. It's not like math skill or learning how to do long division. Everybody learns how to do the same long division. Each one of us individually has our own sense of purpose, the things we're interested in, the things we tend to adopt as our own passion projects. And so imagine two different life directions and three arrows. Arrow number, let's see here. Person number A is moving off in life direction 2 mainly. Person number B is in the middle. Person number C is over here moving off in life direction number 1. B looks around and says, hey, I'm behind. Everybody's better than I am. People are better than I am, even at things they aren't good at. If you look at A is longer than B, even in life direction 1, and that's not even his main life direction. So we have children in our schools and our families who are below average on every dimension, and who look around and say, there's no place for me in the world. How do we keep hope alive for those children? I want to suggest to you that every one of us has a North Star. Every one of us has something you can argue that we were put on the earth to do, that if it gets done, it's going to make the world a better place. If it doesn't get done, the world won't be quite as good a place as it would otherwise have been. It might be just being there to help take care of our elderly parents, or being a role model for all the kids in the extended family, or it could be any of a number. It's really a bundle of things. But our life's mission is to figure out what our own North Star is and find our way there. So for B, we have to let B know that it's out there, and we have to help them develop a sense of agency toward getting it, toward finding it. And if they don't give up, they keep searching, at some point, they'll get there. And then the others each have their own North Stars. So here at top, each of us finding our own destination, our own North Star is a life mission. We were always in the lead. There was never really any competition because no one else was headed to our own unique destination. That is, don't worry about what everybody else is doing, because your purpose in life is unique to you, and you just got to take care of business, stay on track, and ultimately you'll get there, and the world's going to be a better place because of it, is the idea. And so this connects to the idea of purpose and agency. Your purpose, you got to figure out what your purpose is. And then you have to have a sense of agency to do the work that it takes to realize that purpose. And the smarts that you develop through your academic pursuits are going to help you get there, but smarts alone is not enough. And so as we think about what our missions are as parents and teachers and community members, it's really those three things we're trying to cultivate. So we want to ask, what are the life experiences that produce smarts and purpose and agency? I don't know why that, oh, they're the other. What are the life experiences that produce those three things? And I got, I think, 12 more minutes before my time is up. So I just want to point you in the direction of some places where I've tried to answer these questions. One, with regard to parents and family, our book, The Formula, is based on a couple hundred interviews with super successful people, where we interviewed them and their parents about how they were raised. And we found 8 roles, 8 types of things that parents tended to do that came up over and over and over in these stories we heard about. And we named, those roles are called, I don't have time to tell you what every one in detail, but they're the early learning partner, the flight engineer, the fixer, the revealer, the philosopher, the model, the negotiator, and the GPS navigational voice. You kind of have an intuition just because of what I said they are for what they do. But those roles we found repeatedly in the stories of how super successful people were raised. The second, the influence of teaching beyond standardized test scores, engagement, mindsets, and agency. That book, I have a organization, Tripod Education Partners. We provide services to school systems. We use what we call the 7 C's of effective instruction: care, confer, captivate, clarify, consolidate, challenge, and classroom management. And we can look at how each of those predicts multiple dimensions of student engagement. And the report that's on the screen in the middle, which is downloadable from that email, from that web address at the bottom, lays out very nuanced patterns in how those teaching with those 7 C's predicts different aspects of student agency and purpose and behavior and so on. And then finally, on the far side, you'll see the basics starting at birth. There's a ton of brain development in those first 3 years of life. And there are things that we know from research about what produces that brain development. We've got what we call the 5 basics principles that capture a lot of what children need to experience in those first 5 years. First 3 years really is what we want to focus on. So maximize love, manage stress, talk, sing, and point, count, group, and compare, explore through movement and play, and read and discuss stories. And so if you go to thebasics.org and click on either, there's a toolkit for frontline service providers, there's a toolkit for parents that has videos and ways of really saturating communities with what parents need to know in order to provide the early learning experiences that will optimize taking advantage of this opportunity for early childhood brain development. And so if we think of it in an ecological way, and children's social ecologies where they develop, there are home, family, neighborhood, there's school with teachers and peers, and every part of life matters. There's no throwaway period. First 3 years of life, there's a ton of brain development. So 0 to 3. 3 to 5 is learning the preschool socialization and some other little things you need to know. 5 to 9 is learning to read so later you can read to learn, and learning basic math facts and early socialization. 9 to 14 is when identity starts to really come into focus and kids start to think, how do I fit into the world? 14 to 18 is preparing for the transition to adulthood, figure out what courses to take, what I need to do to get myself on track to do the things that fit me best, that will give me my own North Star. 18 to 22 is making the transition to adulthood. 22 to 30 is getting your feet really planted in adulthood. So as communities, there's a social ecology in which we raise our children that provides a constellation of learning experiences from birth into early adulthood, and it all matters. This is bottom line. But in rich communities and in families and schools that do what needs to be done, children from the least advantaged backgrounds can rise to the highest levels of our society. And even if they don't rise to the highest levels, they can achieve their own potential. They can find their own North Stars. They can feel successful in living out their own life purposes. So why don't I stop with that? And I don't know, Zach, are you want to moderate a conversation?
Absolutely. And if folks have questions, please share them in the chat, and I will start with a couple of my own. Ron, I was going to ask, I was not an MIT-trained economist, but what is the opportunity cost of not working and not doing this work?
Well, the opportunity cost is, let me not use the word opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is what you could have done. Well, never mind. Let me not explain it. The cost of not doing it to the society is all the foregone fruits, obviously. And every one of us has a potential, and we come within some distance of achieving it. And that difference between what we could have been and what we actually turn out to do, what we could have done and what we actually do, that difference is lost. It's a cost to the society. And it's also, one could argue, that difference is, if we can do what we need to do, make it up, that the benefit of doing those things are that we reap those extra fruits of the labor. And so I mean, any of us probably on the call could outline the cost of having people unemployment, the greater propensity to enter criminality, the, you know, let's just agree that they're a high cost. But I also think we can also agree that human beings are very malleable, that they're very sensitive to and responsive to their lived experiences. And our job is to figure out how to provide those lived experiences that will affirm young people. I mean, motivational psychology tends to focus on 3 or 4 basic human motive drives. One is to feel a sense of belonging, to feel, hey, people like me, they want me here, they want me to succeed, they want to support me. The second is to feel a sense of influence, that I can make decisions that matter. People listen to me when I speak. The third is to feel a sense of competence. Not only that I'm good at the things, I'm kind of good at what I want to be good at, but I can also get better at it, to have a mastery orientation, and know that the brain's like a muscle, and the harder and longer I work, the smarter I'm going to get. And then have a sense of security, that I feel life's not totally risky, I feel kind of safe. People gravitate to opportunities to experience belonging and influence and competence and security. So the question is, how can we create environments in our communities, in our schools, in our families that provide that belonging and influence and sense of competence, right? And not only for the children, but for every member of the community. I say that I have a little engagement framework that I use. If you want to get people to do something, first of all, they have to have a sense of why you want to do that. What's the goal? What are we trying to achieve? So let me assume, so you got the goal. But to get to people to start striving to do anything in pursuit of that goal, they have to have a knowledge of a strategy, at least one recipe or strategy for the steps they need to take in order to get there. Now, even if they have a recipe or a strategy for the steps in mind, they then need to believe that they either have or can acquire the resources necessary to take those steps to achieve that goal. And even if they have the goal in mind, they know a strategy or recipe, they think they have or can acquire the resources, they still need to believe that the rewards to be experienced along the way and at the destination make it worthwhile to exert the effort to go through that. And the rewards that matter most are belonging and competence and influence, right? Those are the things, we say money sometimes, but we care about money because it allows us to buy belonging and influence and competence, right?
So Ron, in doing some of the preparation, I found some comments where you say that the national data shows achievement gaps start showing up at age 2, or as early as age 2.
Yeah, they show up very early. By the time kids are 2 years old, all the various dimensions of gaps we see later are already in evidence. By parents' education level, by race, ethnicity, by gender even. And my belief based upon the research is that a ton of it is experiential. A ton of it has to do with early lived experiences. We start treating girls and boys differently by the time they're 1 year old. We're more affectionate with little girls. We provide more of the kind of feedback that cultivates academic knowledge. Fathers, when they're playing with their infant and toddler boys, it's more often rough and tumble play. When they're interacting with their daughters, it's literacy related and language related. Okay. And so what we need to do is our basics campaign tries to work through the relationships that people already have, with trusted advisors. We reach them through these relationships to help them understand the importance of maximizing love and managing stress, to shield infants and toddlers from stress, for example, and to express affection so that you establish the attachments that are so important in early childhood. When children in early childhood don't feel emotionally secure, they tend not to develop strong executive function skills. Executive function skills are self-regulation skills. The ability to shift attention from one thing to another quickly, the ability to make a plan and follow through on it, the ability to resist temptation, right? And so if we can help parents and other caregivers to give children these early experiences with the basics, we can send children into kindergarten better prepared to learn, is the idea. And so we've got more than 40 communities across the United States now that are members of the Basics Learning Network. We say it's a learning network because they're all still learning together how to work through community organizations to reach parents with these supports to lift kids from all backgrounds up at the same time. And so I'll leave it at that.
Well, cool, Ron. I have one technical question that's come across, and it is why the significant bump up from around 1998 to 2001? And this refers back to the chart that you shared for Latinos and Blacks. Why were those two groups bumped up so closely to one another?
Let's go all the way back there.
There you go.
Yeah, this from 1999 to 2004. Some people would say that that was No Child Left Behind. That was federal policy that increased accountability. You also had whites going up during that period, right? But you had Blacks and Latinos going up a little bit more rapidly during that period. There's not consensus among the researchers about the degree to which No Child Left Behind did that, is responsible for it. But that's one of the things that we can talk about. If we were looking at the patterns for 17-year-olds, we would see that there was a lot of progress for Black and Latino kids from the early 70s up through the late 90s. I mean, through the early 90s. And there's stories that we can tell for why these things happen when they do. But the main thing, if we look at any of these graphs, there tends to be movement. And there tends to be a lot of movement at particular periods in time. And there's stories we can tell that link that movement to things we know about lived experiences during particular periods. And so bottom line, there's a lot of connotation sometimes that these performance levels and differences are just facts of nature. They aren't. They're facts of lived experience on average, because the lines move around. They're different in different parts of the country. Even there's new national work that shows there are very different patterns in different regions. In communities where you have a lot of fathers at home, across all groups, the gaps aren't as big as they are in places where you don't have as many fathers in households. So there are lots of things that that shape kids' early lived experiences, and that's the bottom line is what are their lived experiences and how do we affect those? Some people like to jump all the way. No, we gotta deal with all these huge structural forces before we can really make any change. And my point is, yes, the structural forces do matter, but if you're seeing a kid today, there's probably something you could do with that kid that would affect their life today. And so there's a lot of room to move around down inside, even with those structural forces being what they are, to change the lived experiences of kids, one kid at a time. And the more we can affect the broader social forces, the even more successful we can be. And just since we're winding down, just one point related to that. If we think of the kids from least advantaged backgrounds, they're the least likely to have personal advocates looking out for their interest. We know that there's certain kids where if they go home and even hint to their parent that something did not go well at school today, that parent is going to be up at the school tomorrow asking what went wrong, and let's be sure it doesn't happen again. That's the role of the flight engineer I talked about in the roles that parents play. The flight engineer helps make sure that flight stays on a high trajectory. Some kids don't have a flight engineer. We need to let even lower income parents know that they can be flight engineers. In our book, there are parents who were homeless when the kids were in elementary school, but who still did all those 7, 8 roles that I talked about. One family, the kid was homeless from the time they were 3 to 6 years old. He's a high school principal at the age of 30 in Chicago and is rising up to become a star in education to make space in the world for little boys like the one he used to be, right? And so there are things that parents with less advantaged backgrounds can do that they don't realize that they can do, and where we have to help them understand that these things are within reach and they can be hugely impactful to do these kinds of things. Okay, and then there are things that schools can do. There are peer dynamics that matter. Okay, if we had a whole semester to spend here with you, I would spend part of it talking about parenting, part of it talking about school culture, part of it talking about instructional practices, part of it talking about peer culture. So we unbundle the child's social lived ecology and talk about how we tweak what happens inside every one of those spaces where children live and learn.
Well, excellent, Ron. I appreciate your time today, and thank you for taking time and letting us into your office this afternoon.
It is a wonder now how through technology. I left one meeting for 45 minutes here to come do this keynote here. Then I'll go back to my other meeting. And
well, right. I appreciate it, and I know on behalf of our guests, thank you. And for everyone else, we're now ready to head into session blocks 3, 4, and 5. Remember, the hashtag is Iowa Ideas 2020, and you can use the Whova tools to connect with fellow attendees. So to everyone else, thank you and enjoy the sessions.